Well, welcome everyone. And so we're expecting that people will be coming into this virtual event room as we start talking, but we're going to get started on time for those of you who are on time. So welcome everyone, and thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us. And as you can see, I'm joined by the internationally best-selling author Heather Morris, and we're going to be talking a lot about her new book, Stories of Hope, but we're also going to be digging into some of her past writing with books that I'm sure you know very well. But firstly, I just wanted to respectfully acknowledge on behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, the traditional custodians of this land I'm currently broadcasting from, the Wurrundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. Moonee Valley is proud of its diverse community and acknowledges the contributions that all people make to this vibrant and inclusive municipality. Now, Heather is coming from another land because she's currently up north, up in Queensland. So I'm sure many people are watching this from all different parts of Australia, and we acknowledge the cultural importance of all that. So we're going to get straight into talking about Stories of Hope, Heather. And I guess what some people might want to know is why nonfiction, after becoming famous around the world for 2 novels, which of course are based on true stories but are fiction. Why nonfiction, and why is it the right time for this nonfiction work now?
Well, hello, good evening, and thanks, Claire. Thanks to the Moonee Valley Library for this wonderful opportunity to have a chat to you folks. First, can I just say, because I'm just so chuffed and excited, that an hour and a half ago I arrived in Brisbane. So I have left Melbourne. I'm outside any bubble that the Victorian government put us in, because I have a son, a daughter-in-law, and 2 little grandsons up here. And I took advantage of the Premier here opening the border today and flew up here. So kia ora, hello, greetings from Brisbane. Beautiful sunny evening. Why nonfiction? Certain things happened over the last sort of 12 to 18 months that kind of steered me in this direction. One of them involves drinking alcohol in a place called Košice in Slovakia. And that, in fact, is where the idea came to, well, not necessarily me initially, but to one of my publishers. And Margaret and I were there because we were still doing research for Cilka's story. And this is one of the reasons, too, why Stories of Hope have come up, and it gives me the opportunity to tell you about my time in Košice and to tell you how I was able to, well, tell Cilka's story, because I went to the very town, well, I think it's a city in Slovakia. It's sort of, yeah, for us, it's like a big town. And I spent time with people who knew her, neighbours and friends. And while there, I spent a couple of days sitting in the small apartment right next door to the one that Cilka and her husband had lived in for over 40 years, with this elderly couple who had moved in on the same day and been their friends. And throughout the time I was sitting there with them, other people in the apartment building were coming in to talk to me. So at any point in time, there could be up to a dozen, at one point 20 people squashed into this tiny room. I had Margaret with me, and I had 2 translators. And later on that evening, after a few wines, my publisher and I went downstairs to a bar and had a few more drinks. And it was then that Margaret said to me how overwhelmed and astonished she was at watching me communicate with these people throughout the day. They didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Slovakian. And yet we were communicating because I was listening. And she said, they just totally opened up to you. And after about a 3rd or 4th port, she said to me, how did you do that? How do you get people to just talk to you like that? And I said, well, you just listen. And my great-grandfather, when I was growing up as a girl, he taught me how to do that. So, yeah.
Now, I'd love to talk to you more about your great-grandfather a little bit later, but one thing I wanted to ask off the top was, I guess, in some ways, I mean, it has got tips on listening and stuff, and as I said, we'll talk about that a bit later, but it really is also a companion piece for the Tattooist of Auschwitz in a lot of ways. So for people who've really connected with that book, and obviously a lot of people have, because there's more than 6 million people around the world who have bought it, which deserves congratulations and a clap. What can people expect to learn about Lale and your relationship with him through reading Stories of Hope?
Well, that's the magic word you said there, Claire. My and Lale relationship. That's probably bad English, isn't it? Lale and my relationship. I have editors, folks. I just write the words and somebody else puts them together properly. But yeah, it seemed to be over the last 12 to 18 months that whenever I was talking like I am now, but in person with you there in front of me, that well, people didn't want me to talk about the book anymore because they'd read it and say, "What else can you tell me?" And I found I started talking about my relationship with Lully, and it seemed to be something people wanted to hear and couldn't get enough of. And so I guess by writing stories of hope, and it's all geared around the art, if you want to call it that, of listening, of actively listening to somebody, because hey, I had to do that to get Lully's story, it gave me the opportunity to now share with people who I don't get to talk to like this and tell them those beautiful little vignettes and stories about my 3 years with this man. So that's what you get. Some funny and humorous and, well, I don't think about anything sad in there, just lovely, lovely, my memories I share with you.
And how would you describe the relationship? Because I guess at the start, you were somebody that he sought out. He wanted somebody to listen to his story, and that's how the relationship formed. But it became a friendship. But was it an equal friendship in that you would confide in him just as much as he would share intimate stories about his life with you?
Well, here's the thing. I actually never got the chance to share a lot of intimate details about me because my damn children beat me to it. After a couple of months of spending time with Lully and realizing that there were certain things he started to say to me and then he would stop and shut down. And I figured it out that it was because he didn't know me well enough. He didn't trust me yet. And so what I did was I took him home to have dinner with my 3 adult or young adult children and my husband one evening. And there, those kids of mine decided to spill the beans on all my faults and foibles and everything negative and bad about me that they could. Well, it actually worked. I hadn't planned on that. But as he told me when I was driving him home, "You're just like me. You're just an ordinary person." And he felt that he now knew me because he got to know me through the eyes of my family. So, yeah, I didn't share much with him because they did. And after that, going forward, there were many things I did share with him, not to the same degree.
And generally speaking, you are a private person, and even since becoming so well known for your writings with Tattooist of Auschwitz and Cilka's Journey, there hasn't been a lot of articles that have sort of dug into who you really are. So how big a leap was it for you to share stories of your own life? And you talk about, a not very positive relationship that you had with your own mother. Was that hard for you to give something up like that of yourself and share something so personal with your readers?
It was because I don't like talking about, let alone writing about me. It's one thing to say something, mind you, in this day and age, it sticks around forever too, doesn't it? But, put it in ink and print, there's a good chance it might stay around even longer. But here's the other reason why I wrote the book. All those amazing people from all around the world who have written to me, and I'm talking thousands, folks. There's not a day goes by that I don't get emails. And more often than not, a lot of the people are writing just not to say thank you for the book, but they share something about themselves. They have this courage of being able to reach out to me, a perfect stranger, and tell me something, tragic or traumatic in their lives. And linking Lully and Gita and Cilka and their survival and the hope that they've got from there. Well, it occurred to me that if you folks out there can be brave enough to share something with me, then I had to, suck it up and show some of that courage as well in revealing a bit more about me.
And so through that, you've mentioned these people that contact you and share their stories. That's been happening since you wrote The Tattooist of Auschwitz. And I know you've mentioned before it comes by email. People find you on Facebook and send you, Facebook messages. Now you've got your website. People have a very formal way of being able to contact you. But you've also set up a website dedicated to collecting these stories in a formal way now. Can you tell me about that evolution? Because I find that really interesting, why people are so determined to share their story and why they want their story to be heard, even if it's just by you.
Although I can't totally answer that because, I've never written to an author in my life, and I've been reading for a lot of years. And so when I started getting these emails, I was a little bit shocked initially. But then when we started seeing the tone of many of them, well, it occurred to my publishers and I that these stories that some of them are telling me, they need to be possibly read by others if the author wants them to be, or are they just writing them for some kind of outlet? And it turns out it's a combination of both. And so in creating a website called Your Stories of Hope, we invite people who want to write down for cathartic reasons, because they want others to know their story, or they just want to, as I say, get it out themselves, get it down, find an ear, even if it's just through a website, that will hear something about their own personal lives. And so we invite people to submit an email, a story. And we have some incredibly amazing stories that have come to us from around the world. And I've read a few of them out occasionally on Facebook, via Facebook, my live event. And the publishers provide editorial assistance. We say to everybody, would you like to have your story, some assistance in writing it, so that you may want to submit it to a short story competition, or for the purpose of being published in a selection of short stories. And so free editorial advice and assistance given. And yeah, I'm really chuffed with that.
But within that, is there a story that could be found that could be your next book? Is that part of the process too?
We're kind of, not necessarily out of the website, though who knows? There are so many amazing stories that have come through. And I've been delighted and overwhelmed at the number of people who have written to me saying, this is my story, can you tell it? Now, the current book I'm working on is one of those such stories that has come to me. And there have been several other stories that have come to me, and because of sheer time, and as you can see, I'm not getting any younger. There's only so many stories I've got left in me. But my publishers have connected with these people who own these stories and are providing ghostwriters and publication. And there will be several other stories come out that wouldn't have existed otherwise.
Now, I'm definitely going to ask you about what your next book is later, but for now we'll stick on Stories of Hope, because I have already mentioned that, you did share this personal thing about your relationship with your mother, and her relationship with you, and then your relationship with your great-grandfather became really important in terms of how you understood what it is to be heard, what it is not to be heard, how to listen, because your mother apparently, you write in Stories of Hope, wasn't a great communicator and certainly didn't sort of make you feel valued when you were talking to her. Yet your great-grandfather, conversely, encouraged you to tell him your stories and also encouraged you to listen to his. How important was it that he was there in your life to teach you that when your mother was the person to do that?
In retrospect, it was absolutely pivotal to have had somebody in your life. And I guess this is it, folks, isn't it? That it doesn't necessarily need to be, say, your parent or one of your parents who does have that role. But if just every child can have any adult in their life, family or friend, for whom they feel a connection that allows them to be themselves and lets them feel valued. Because, I did not get that from my mother. And my father was quite a quiet person who pretty much just would say, go and ask your mother, well, anytime you asked him anything. So he wasn't harsh in any ways. He just was, children were to be seen and not heard when I was growing up. And that was the way it was.
It is the way it was, but your great-grandfather, though, wasn't like that. So how did he teach you to listen? And why was it so important to him that he wanted to teach you that, do you think?
I think it came along I came along in his life at the right time too. Just like I was the right person in the right time and the age for Lully in his late 80s. My great-grandfather, when I was that 10, 11, 12-year-old, he was a man then in his 80s. And probably in some ways he was looking for somebody to talk to. I grew up with, he was 2 paddocks away from me. My grandmother lived 2 paddocks in the other direction. We were the whole little village, somewhere along the line I was probably connected to. But I never heard people talking in any detail about their lives. It was all gossip or nothing. And I had four brothers, and I think he felt sorry for me. He started talking to me, and then we just connected. And it became a daily thing after school to sit with him. And he, yeah, as he said to me, you will only ever learn by listening. But I was a kid, and he flipped it and said, now, he would always say to me, tell me about what your day was like. Tell me what's going on with you. And so while I did most of the listening, he definitely invited me to be the person, and he would sit there quietly, and that's how I knew that I could be listened to as well.
Now, I have mentioned that Stories of Hope in a lot of ways is a companion piece to both the Tattooist of Auschwitz and Cilka's journey. But what it is also is that you've interspersed these stories of hope and stories of your own life with tips and insights on how to become a better listener and how you can sort of get stories from people that might be close to you that previously maybe haven't shared important stories from their life. What can you share with us tonight that are good tips for people who, you know, Christmas is coming up and we're going to be in situations all around the country, hopefully finally that we can travel now, where people are coming into contact with elderly people in their family that they might not see that often. How can you sort of make those conversations meaningful and maybe really listen to somebody and get an insight into who they are? What are your tips for that?
Yeah, I guess at this time of the year, it's not going to be conducive to being able to actually sit with somebody and for a concentrated period of time. I'm talking about a family member or a close friend and get a story per se from them. Conversations are what we have every day, and they're perfectly fine. But in conversations, you know, you're just listening enough to be able to respond, and you're not wanting to connect with anything deeper with what's being said to you. And as I said, that's perfectly fine. But as of the tips that I give, and particularly with talking to elders, and I'm just going to, elders, by the way, can be anybody. I've got children and your own adult children, but elders is just somebody that has been in your life for a long time. Is there something in their home that you have been, well, seeing but not seeing for decades? A picture on a wall or a trinket on a mantelpiece. If you want to know something about, well, why is that trinket there? Why not ask the person, hey, Grandma, can you remember where you bought that? You know, where were you? What does it mean? It's sitting on her mantelpiece for a reason. And let me tell you about something that played out just yesterday. Just yesterday. I was doing a Zoom talk just like this, but not to a library. It was into a U3A. And everybody that was tuned into it were on the screen as well. There was, I think, 22, 23 people. And we just had a very conversational thing between a lot of us. And there was a couple, a husband and wife, sitting there. They admitted that they were in their early 70s. And lovely chats going on about, you know, listening. And, of course, they were in that age group where nobody listens to me and I regret, and I'll come back to that, I regret I didn't listen to somebody. And I picked out this one person that I was looking at for this couple. And I said to them, I said, tell me about that painting behind you. And this gentleman then went on to tell me about the painting behind him. He had done it. I did not know that.
Okay.
He had been an art teacher, and his wife and him had said that when they retired, they wanted to go and spend time in Tuscany, and they did. And then he came back, and he had painted several things, he said, which was his interpretation of the Tuscan landscape. Quite abstract. You wouldn't have picked it for that. And you know what? All these other people who were on the Zoom, they were part of this group with us, and they connected at least once a week, face to face. And all these other people went, you know, every time we're on, I look at that painting behind you. I wondered, you know, where it came from and what it was about. It just took sort of my saying to him, tell me about that painting behind you, picking one person out. And we got this whole story. And these other 22 people went, wow. Is it that simple? And I went, you just played out, guys.
Yeah, well, it's just a reminder that listening's not just done with your ears. Like, it's about observation, and it's about body language, and it's about hearing the way people say words, not just the words they say. So when you're listening to people that you're chatting with, like Lale, you're doing all of that. You've got all your senses alive, I imagine. Tell us about that and how you sort of honed those powers of observation.
Well, you have to be in the moment. Now, one of the things that my great-grandfather Gramps did to me often would be sometimes when I'd sit down and say, "What are we talking about today, Gramps?" And he would just say to me, he'd sit back in his chair, and he was a big man. If you have to see the book Stories of Hope, you see a picture of him. And he had this big imposing chair on a veranda that we sat on. And he'd just lean back and he'd say, "We're just listening to the world go by today, girlie." And he would just sit back and close his eyes. And he'd already taught me, he'd already said to me when I said to him, "What are you talking about, Gramps? What's he to listen to? There's nothing here." And he had taught me over a period of weeks. "Can you hear that?" I go, yeah, sounds like a tractor." "Well, whose tractor do you think it is? Does it sound like the one that we've got?" "Oh, no, that must be Bob's farms down." That sound travelled. We would hear the dogs rounding up the cows because it was milking time. And he said to me, "Which dog's that?" You'd hear one of them barking. And after a while, not seeing, not knowing, I would hear and know which dog was barking. I would hear my mother 2 paddocks away yelling at one or maybe all 4 of my brothers. I would hear it and it would be intensified. And when you do sit with somebody who's talking to you and telling you something, you just go into that zone of actually hearing their words and watching their body. Nothing else happens around you. All the white noise at that point disappears too.
And I imagine with Lale, that would have been a really intense situation too, because the stories he was telling you, I mean, obviously there were some happy stories too, and the Tattooist of Auschwitz is, as you've always said, a love story of the love he had for Gita. But he was telling you some really painful stories. So that would have been, present in his voice and his mannerisms. How did you cope with that and the highs and lows of what listening to him actually meant?
Look, they were horrific stories he was telling me more often than not. One of the things that I'd also learned because of my work at Monash Medical Centre was to see and interpret through normally the body language when it's time to shut them down, time to stop. And I could see that in Lully. Sometimes he'd say to me, "No, I need to go on," and then I'd give him that permission to do that. But also being aware of what the level of distress it's causing somebody. Don't immediately shut them down. Give them a chance to work through it. But with Lully, if I felt that it was going on too much and it's now, I need to flip you out of this place, you could actually see him. He actually wouldn't be looking at me. He would be looking at me but not seeing me. And I knew he was back in 1942 in Auschwitz. And leave him there for a little bit, but never leave him there. And find that sweet point where you say, "Okay, hey, listen, how do you think your football team's going to go this weekend?" I had things to flip him out that I knew would work. But here's the other thing too, that when there are silences when someone's talking, don't rush to fill them. Just let them hang there for a bit. And only if they sort of go on and become really uncomfortable, then what I suggest you do is just repeat back the last thing you heard that person say. And when you repeat back something, that's when they know that you've actually listened. You don't tell your opinion, you repeat back.
How critical was hope for him? And is that when this sort of whole Stories of Hope idea really started germinating for you, listening to Lale share his stories of hope and how critical that word and the meaning and holding on to the meaning of that word was for him? And then, of course, for Cilka, hope was a theme there as well.
It was crucial for him. And he said it all the time. I always had hope that we would get out of here, except for one time. There was only one time when he was in Birkenau that he did lose all hope. And it was Gita that actually had to get him out of it when he went down that rabbit hole where he saw no coming out of it. And that was when he had seen the 4,500 Gypsy or Roma people who he lived with, who he considered to be part of their family, their tribe, when he saw them physically being taken away and then to have them literally rain down on him the next day. Well, he did go into it, he said, a real despair and lost all hope at that. How could that happen? But it's amazing. He had this one person in his life there, that was Gita, who did not share his hope for a future. his hope that they would survive and get out of there. And I guess with her, just seeing how he'd lost it, she needed to find it to be able to give it back to him. What a gift.
And that's just part of what you're exploring in Stories of Hope, because as I mentioned, it is a companion piece in a lot of ways to the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and it does give you these insights into Lale as a man. But it's much more than that, and you're sharing lots of different stories of hope. What's one of your favourites from the book that people may not have any inkling about? It's got nothing to do with Lale, nothing to do with Cilka. What are some of the other stories you tell?
Well, there's a couple there that are sort of, quite sort of, well, incredibly emotional for me because they involve members of my family. And there's one there that is the one story out of my 20 years of working at Monash Medical Centre that I've written in such a way that I can clearly disguise the people for whom this event happened to. But I also have a story in there that I got permission from my brother to write. And this is a story about not allowing other people's hopes and dreams for you to cloud and interfere with your own hopes and dreams.
And that's something really at the moment for any parents of VCE students, I guess, and matric students around the country who have their exams and the mums want them to be a lawyer or whatever.
We do have the right. We can live vicariously through our family members, but it all comes down to that. If we do our job right as parents, then we should be just preparing our children to make their own decisions and then support them, good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm not going to give you parenting advice. Gosh, it's the last thing I should do. But something happened to one of my brothers that once again involved my mother. And because of the time, he just kind of let her guide him or push him. No, she didn't guide. She pushed him into doing something. And I'm talking about a career that he, was not suited to and did not want to do. Excuse me, Zach.
That's okay. I've had the same sniffles today. I thought, how do I even get a cold with everybody walking around with hand sanitizer and things?
Hey, I've been on 2 flights today. There's probably been bugs galore. No, we're wearing masks.
Don't bring it back to Victoria if you've...
No, it's all right. I was in Canberra for a couple of hours and then here was no, I'm good. But I've always known this story about my brother and how for 2 years of his life he went down this path, not because he wanted to, but because my mother made him, and how he had to get to that point in his life where he rebelled and finally went, well, hang on a minute, I'm living a dream that I don't want, or I'm living somebody else's dreams and hopes for me. And it's quite humorous, and how it all played out involved him having to get very, very antsy with the New Zealand Navy and technically being thrown in the brig and willfully disobeying a direct order from a commanding officer of the Royal New Zealand Navy. But I think it's a lovely story that you can learn from in terms of, once, as I say, trying to coerce somebody to live the life that you probably wanted yourself.
And so is this a book for people who may feel that hope in their own lives is lost? Is this a book that they can turn to and hopefully get inspiration from other people's stories? I guess the Tattooist and Cilkas were like that for a lot of people too.
Yeah, look, yes and no. Look, if there's a tip or two in there in terms of how to listen to somebody in your life, or how to listen to your children or your grandchildren, or even your adult children, which has a different perspective on it altogether. And I do share a story about that with regard to my daughter and son-in-law. But I guess to me, it's about, the most important one I want you to take away from it is the listening to yourself aspect, the importance of, reminding yourself or having somebody remind you, namely me in this book, that it's also important to listen to yourself. And that's not something we even think about. And I know I don't, but I think I practice it a bit, even though I don't think about it. And that's finding the time to actually listen to your head and your heart and your body. It's talking to you all the time. More often than not, though, your bloody head is telling you negative things. Well, mine is, and I think that's with a lot of people. I say things about myself that I would never say to anybody else, and 9 times out of 10, they're totally unjustified. It's the old beating yourself up, isn't it? But then,
is that something you've had to work on, or get better with age, or is there some wisdom there that comes with maturity?
It is a fine wine type moment, folks. When you realise that you've taken on board, and in my case, it came from sort of the parents and the upbringing, that you weren't worthy, that you were only going to have a certain path, and allow that to become the way you've led your life a lot. And that just happens through osmosis, I think, because it's, thankfully, I made a point, and this is what happens when you do become a parent, isn't it? You take anything good you liked about your childhood and you try and duplicate that, and then you reject the rest. No, that it's not going to do that. And I very much was a parent in particular about rejecting all these things that I saw and did not like as a child that were part of my upbringing. But still, there's always, you've got your demons. But the other thing was to say, as much as my head would beat me up occasionally, my heart never did. I've always felt that I wanted to be loving to everybody in my life, and that I wanted to be loved in return. And by giving that out, I got it back. So listen to your heart more than your bloody head, okay? And listen to your body every now and then when it says, get off that chair, get off your bum and walk around and get some exercise.
And so back to the writing now, because I'm quite fascinated the difference between fiction and non-fiction. I was wondering, was it hard for you to make the switch, because professional writing is something that you've only sort of come to recently, I guess, as somebody who's getting money.
Sure.
Well, you've been writing for a long time, but when I say professional writing, as in earning a living, and you're known as a fiction writer. So had you ever been paid before for a non-fiction piece, and was it something you had to think about differently and train yourself to write in that different way? What came easier and what do you like more?
I'll write fiction any day of the week, and I'll write about somebody else's life any day of the week rather than mine. It was a very different process, as you can imagine, sort of having to have that voice which is now just all yours, and revealing about yourself. So in terms of technique and structure, very, very different. But, I'm the luckiest person alive when it comes to having a publishing company with publishers and editors and all these team of people who encourage and help and make me become a better writer than I could ever be on my own. And I never ever decry that. Both the publishers that do all the English, but here's the thing, that it's not much point in giving them a huge shout out here in Australia, because you all speak and read in English, but Tattooist of Auschwitz has been reprinted or has been reproduced in 47 languages. Now, given that it's selling very well in most of those, for me, what people who translate stories do, and we get it here, we get foreign language books that get translated to English for us, and that whole notion of being able to tell a story and have it translate into other languages and still resonate. I've just gone on this little tangent because I'm so grateful to those people in my life. But yes, look, I don't think there'll be another non-fiction book.
I was just going to ask you that. Never say never, though. You never know what's around the corner. But you prefer fiction.
Well, absolutely. But it's not total fiction for me. Somebody asked me the other day, would you ever write a book that wasn't about somebody that you created yourself? And I went, I don't think I could do that. I do not. And I guess that comes down to the old, what Clint Eastwood said, wasn't it? A man's got to know his limitations. And I just do not believe that I have the creativity to ever create a story from nothing. I know that, so, why waste my time trying?
Well, people might have different ideas about your creativity and how they rate it. But anyway, that's part of that beating yourself up again, I think. So we won't do that. Now, we are going to go to questions from the audience soon. If anybody does have a question, now's the time to make sure you type it into the chat so we can come back to them soon. But
sorry, Claire, just to interrupt. Sorry, everyone. My name's Kelvin. I'm just doing the tech stuff here at the moment. I'm just wondering if people could enter their questions into the Q&A part of webinar. You'll find that down the bottom of your webinar screen. Just click on there, and then you can put some questions in.
That would be great. And now's a good time to do it. We're going to keep talking for a few more minutes, but if there are questions, we can definitely go to the audience. And if people are just happy listening, which is what we're talking about, don't worry, Heather and I can keep talking up a storm until 8 o'clock, no worries, but she'd always love to hear from you. So think of something and send it. But one thing I wanted to pick up on was that little hint that you dropped before about the book that you're working on at the moment. We were talking about how people just started sending you their stories and how that's created this whole website, but it's also connected you with a lot of amazing stories, one of which I believe is your next book, which is fiction, again, based on true life. So what can you tell us about that and when it's coming out?
Okay, it will be released on the 17th of October next year, if I can. No, it will be released. My publishers aren't watching this, I'm good. Yeah, a little bit behind the 8 ball right now with the writing of it, but there's one thing I can do, and I was like this when I was doing exams at schools and at university too. Just push it to the limit. Give me a deadline, I will meet it, even if it means doing it. So it will come out on the 17th of October next year. Its title simply is Three Sisters. And it is one of those stories that came to me in an email that I read in the early hours of the morning in South Africa in June last year. An email that gave me chills and made it impossible for me to sleep for the rest of the night. An email from a man who lives in Toronto in Canada, who wrote saying that he'd picked up a copy of the Tattooist of Auschwitz on his way to visit his mother in Tel Aviv in Israel. Now, thankfully, Canada has the same cover that we do here, just the black with the 2 arms.
Now, a lot of people might not even know that the book has different covers all around the world, but it does, and some of them are really beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, 55 countries, and only Canada and Brazil took the same cover that we have here. It surprised the hell out of me. Yes, amazing covers, I love them. I should see what the Chinese and the Koreans and all those people do with it. However, I digress. The fact that Canada had the same cover meant that the next morning when this man, Oded, got up and went out into the lounge room and took the book, planning on reading it some more, and left it on the coffee table of his mom, and his mom walked past and looked at the cover and said the words to him, "That must be about Blali and Gita." She could see the number on the arm on the book, and she then looked at the number on her own arm, and it was 3 apart, 3 away. And she knew that her sister Sibby's was only 2 away from Gita's, because these girls, they're 3 sisters, they were 15, 17 and 19. They were rounded up at the same time Gita was, because they came from the same town, the same village, went to school together, and found themselves in Auschwitz on I think it was the 10th of April 1942. Actually, only 2 of them went on that train. The third, her story has to run in tangent with these other 2, because she was the middle child and Magda had been unwell, and a doctor in their town who had heard what was going on with the rounding up of young girls, I don't think even Claire knows this, this family doctor, non-Jewish doctor, he persuaded the girl's mom to let him take Magda, even though she just had a fever, and put her in hospital, thinking that he could save her if she was in hospital. They thought that Livia, at only 15, she was too young. They surely wouldn't take a 15-year-old. And the older sister, Sibby, she wasn't actually at home. She was out in the forest training to become, well, someone who would travel to Palestine and forge a new life in that country. And so really only Livia, the 15-year-old, when the Germans, well, actually it wasn't the Germans, it was the Hilary guards, the Slovakian guards, knocked on the door and said to her mum, "Where are your daughters? We've got their names. They need to report in 2 days' time for the train." So 2 of them, because Sibby came home and insisted on going with her baby sister, even though her name wasn't on the list. She owned quite a bit of this book, aren't I? But just briefly, I'll get back to it. 3 sisters, because Magda did ultimately end up in Auschwitz as well. So their survival there, well, they have stories that we have never seen written anywhere else because of, once again, the unique perspective and role they had. And it comes back to, history and memory. And when I get criticised for, well, that is not factual, that Lully, how did that happen to Lully? We can't find that written anywhere else. Well, if you ask any survivor of the Holocaust their story, it will differ from every other member's. So these three girls survived, but not only Auschwitz-Birkenau, their survival of a march, a death march in January 45, but it's a story in itself. How these three girls, and along with 7 or 8 others, ran from the Germans and had to come across the Russians and the Germans, and incredibly 4 weeks of trying to get through Poland and Germany to safety to the Allies. But it doesn't end there. These sisters then find themselves rejected when they get back to Slovakia. And the next episode or chapter in their lives has them training to become freedom fighters, once again, to go to Palestine and be there at the creation of the State of Israel.
You're tackling such iconic events in our recent history. Do you feel the weight of responsibility? You mentioned before, accuracy and different people's perspectives really can't be challenged because it's their own memory, but there must be a weight that you feel in that you are telling such big stories. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the weight I feel has got nothing to do with the history and academia and how they have told these stories. I don't buy into that. Any weight that I feel and responsibility is only to the people whose story it is I'm telling, and making sure that I reflect the stories that they lived, that they are happy with them. And 2 of these sisters are still alive. They're 94 and they're 96. They're living in Tel Aviv, and I got to see them. I went in June straight from South Africa and spent a week with them. And I went back in January and spent another week with them and their families. And I now have to just watch that video with this beautiful 94-year-old as she shares more of her story. And that's the only responsibility I feel. And that the sister who's died, the older one, Sibby, her 2 sons and her adult grandsons, the children, I'm in their lives as well, so that I make sure I reflect their mother and great and grandmother's story well. So that's the only responsibility and weight I feel. And if it doesn't tie in with what the academics and the historians have written, well, it's not that I don't care, but I'm not going to let it influence me because it's the memory of the person. Because, hey, guys, did you know that in Hebrew there is no word for memory? As far as the Jewish tribe and culture are concerned, all their stories must come from the memories of those who lived it.
And it comes back to that importance of listening and the importance of why people just want to be heard. They don't want to be challenged that their memory might not, fit the history books. They want to just talk about their emotions and how it made them feel. And I guess that's what your books resonate with people around the world, that people can identify with it. They can tap into those emotions. It doesn't really matter about every single detail. It's the overwhelming themes and feelings that your books evoke, do you think?
Well, I do think that you kind of hit it on the nail on the head there, because I'm a non-Jewish person telling in all these instances, quite Jewish stories in some ways, but they're not Jewish stories. They're stories of real people, ordinary people who lived through extraordinary times, but to be able to write them without any baggage of my own with regard to not being part of the culture, it does free me up to tell these stories. And it's just not Jewish people who want to read them. And that's been the thing I think that surprised me initially. I thought that maybe I was writing for a Jewish audience, but it's not been that way. And here's another example of how that has not been the case. I was just thinking about it today when I got on a plane today for the first time in many months, because I've been travelling a lot the last couple of years, and I thought about flying up here. I thought about a plane trip I made, 18 months or so ago to Poland, and I was flown there by the government there to receive an award on national live television, because the Tattooist of Auschwitz for the year of 2018 at that point was the biggest selling book in that country. It then also was the biggest selling book in that country in 2019 as well. Nearly 500,000 copies of the book have been sold in Poland. Less than 5,000 people in Poland identify as being Jewish. So that kind of tells me that it is not pigeonholed for anyone in particular. And that's a pretty amazing thing, and I'm really humbled by that in the very country where these atrocities and horrific episodes played out, the people now living there want to know about it.
Mm. It's really powerful, and it's amazing that you've been able to bring those stories to the world, and people have definitely connected with them by your sales and how popular they've been. So hopefully Stories of Hope is another one that people see, a different side. It's obviously not the same sort of book, but it's still connected to the previous two books that you've written. And also, of course, you do share these tips. Now, one thing before we go to questions, which I hope there are a few waiting there, Kelvin, my last question to you is getting back to listening and sharing one of the tips from the book, which is what you've touched on just then. It's about listening without judgment and not judging the story that's being told to you, just listening. What more can you say about that? How important is it to listen to somebody without sort of putting your own moral code onto what they're telling you?
It's the beginning, the middle, and the end. Absolutely. You may not like what somebody's telling you. You may think you would not have handled a situation the same way, but surely that tells you that you also are unique and a remarkable person in your own right, because you won't respond to something the way somebody else did. And absolutely, those words, do not judge, have got to be the only way you can ever expect somebody to be vulnerable and courageous and tell you something. You absolutely, as I say, beginning, middle, and end for me.
Now, Kelvin, are there any people who have some questions waiting in the wings that we can put to Heather?
Otherwise, I haven't received any questions yet, so I
again
encourage people to go down to that Q&A tab down the bottom of the screen, because this is a really good opportunity to ask one of our top authors.
Definitely do have a few more minutes so people can do it. But
I had one question.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just wondering, Heather, what writers have either influenced you or writers you just admire and as writers?
Oh, look, thank you, Kelvin. In terms of writers who write, well, I don't want to compare myself to her in any way, stretch of the imagination, but she has a style which I adored, because I'm talking about Hilary Mantel, somebody who also, she wrote the rule book on writing historical fiction and bringing it into the voice and the words and making it readable when she's writing about, hundreds of years ago. So I love her style, and she uses, like I do, conversation and dialogue. So yeah, Hilary Mantel, how can I go any further than her when it comes to writing similar books to myself? But here's the thing. I actually, for my pleasure of reading, I'm a bit of a nerd for Michael Connelly and Lee Child and David Baldacci.
Okay.
Minette Walters. I love reading about Minette Walters. Great books, all set in England, and all the terrible murder mysteries that go on. So yeah, I'm a bit of I like my fiction to be total escapism. I like my heroes to be man or woman. I don't care, as long as they are larger than life. I also watch every James Bond movie that comes out, by the way. But in terms of, I also love, of course, memoirs. How could I not? And I picked up Barack Obama's. I've been waiting for that to come out, knowing that I loved Michelle's book, Becoming, and hanging out for that. And I went to get it thinking, well, here's a good bedtime read. Have you seen that book?
The new one?
Yeah, it's massive. And I picked it up and going, I don't know if I can hold this. So
I will. This book on the shelf behind me. I was just looking, but yeah.
No, the new one is huge. But yes, reading about any person who's like Nelson Mandela, who are inspirational and perhaps more contemporary than historic.
Now, it's not surprising that every time you tell a story, and when you were telling stories about the Three Sisters, the upcoming one, it's very filmic, and obviously your background was screenwriting. And that's how the Tattooist of Auschwitz began. So there might be some people listening tonight who've heard whispers of the Tattooist hitting the small screens. Have you got an update? Because I think people might have been expecting that it's coming soon, but of course this lousy pandemic has knocked a few things on its head. So are we seeing the Tattooist on the screen? And will Cilka's journey also make it that way, do you think?
You don't even know this, but last Friday night I did have a 2-hour Zoom chat with the producers in the UK with regard to the miniseries. Yes, it's a 6-part miniseries, and it's in that kind of it's beyond development. It's kind of between there and pre-production. So the problem that we're having, of course, is all the right people are signed up for it. So it's what's called financially greenlit, which is pretty damn exciting. But of course, plans are all over the place in terms of filming. Now, they pointed out to me, which didn't occur to me until the producer pointed out to me on Friday night. She said, you've got to realise that we are making the equivalent of 3 feature films. That's how big this project is. Now, it's a lot of the groundwork is all now being done in terms of how to film it, where to film it. But the where to film it is problematic. Poland have said we can film it there. Hungary have said, well, you can also film here because they've got the same scenery. But you can't get into those countries right now. So they're trying to work out, well, let's find COVID-safe ways of doing this. And so this has become the challenge for any person making film or television drama. Let's now have a COVID way of doing this, of being able to go into these countries and have the quarantine periods and have these tight groups that do not leave the compound, being locked away. So that's where they're at, trying to work out how they can do that. It's definitely coming. All the people in multiple countries are all on board. And once they've got a safe plan, a way of doing it, so that's what they're working on right now.
Which must be great for you because it comes a full circle of how you sort of connected with writing in the first place and how you saw the story, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. So there was lots of amazing information shared with me last Friday night, and yes, but I don't get to make announcements about who, what, when and where. That they come through press releases, and they did explain to me how those press releases come out at certain times, and the timing of them is all preset. You announce, the director here, the main cast here, the shoot start there. So it's a process. And
now, Kelvin, I'm sure we won't be surprised if there are no questions because we did another library talk not that long ago, and I think people are really subscribing to the idea of listening, and they're just listening. So it's not going to offend us if there's no questions, but last call out if there are any. Now is your time. So, Kelvin, has anyone sent you a question?
No, nobody sent me a question.
That's all right. Well, I've got just one last question for Heather before we finish, and thanks so much for your time and sharing all your stories. But I was just wondering, what can you tell us about the way your life has changed? You're talking of stories of hope. I guess you had this hope that you wanted to be a writer. You really didn't know how to go about it. You really weren't sure if it would actually work out. But hope was obviously something you held on to. How has your life changed since you listened to Lale's story of hope?
Well, since I listened to his story of hope, which was some time ago, and I've just had these years, something like 12 odd years, trying to get that chance to have his story either made into a film, which is what I wrote it as initially and hung on to that for too long, and then subsequently the novel. Well, the novel came out, 2.5 years ago, and it was the same. About 2 months after that, I turned 65, which was when I decided I would retire and then try and work full-time. So I actually had to write The Tattooist of Auschwitz while working full-time, and then was able to leave work a month before the book came out. Well, it's not the retirement that I thought I'd be having, I have to admit, but wow.
It'll be better, right? It's better.
way better, yeah. No, I thought I might actually learn how to play the guitar and play golf. So these things have all gone by the by. I can't do that. But yeah, it's pretty amazing that you get to retirement and this whole new life opens up.
I think personally you should still learn how to play the guitar, and then maybe you could write song lyrics, and who knows what career could be You could
Okay, I'll take that out.
be or something down the track, or I don't know, Joan Baez or something. I don't know.
All right, noted.
Put it on the list of things to do. We're at time and we love keeping to time. So thanks to Kelvin for managing all the tech stuff behind the scenes. Thanks to Heather for, the wonders of technology and joining us from your family celebration up there in Queensland. Thanks that we can be free to travel. Thanks to whoever that is, just for making work out a little bit. It is. It's us working all hard.
Everybody in Melbourne, in Victoria. Yes. And thank you, Claire, once again. I love chatting with you.
That's okay. And thanks to everybody who took the time and lurked silently in the background. We know you're listening, but next time, maybe ask a question, because you might get a great answer and you'll feel listened to, which is important. And that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about listening to people, being heard, the value of people's stories, and not forgetting and logging these stories and creating these memories that can live on in other people's in generations to come. That's what's important. Thank you, Heather. Stories of Hope. I would have it here, but I don't have it, but you can imagine.
I don't either.
And Heather's going to show you if she's got it. But if she hasn't, you can look it up on her website, and I'm sure that the City of Moonee Valley Library has it, and I'm sure you can reserve it. Support authors, support your libraries, support your bookstores. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And remember, there's a little survey that's going to pop up now where you can tell the City of Moonee Valley that we're fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.